That is why the expropriation bill, in its very bones, not only by its details, but in its very bones, is an illegitimate and very dangerous and very misnamed piece of legislation that South Africans would do very well to push back against.
Why does compensation matter in the event of expropriation? Well, joining me to discuss is Martin van Staden. He is the newly appointed Deputy Head of Research at the Institute of Race Relations. So Martin, before we address the topic of today, could you tell us more about your new role at the IRR?
Yeah, thanks, David. The policy environment in South Africa is fraught, and we are in decline, specifically due to bad policy from government. And the IRR has been at the very forefront of advancing good, liberal, evidence-based policies in this country for about a century now. And I hope to make my contribution in that over the next few months and years at the IRR, so that we can get out of this rut.
Well, best of luck. Let's get into the topic of the day, which is this idea of compensation. Why does compensation matter? And linked to that, why does expropriation without compensation represent such a risk to South Africa's economy?
Yeah, look, David, the expropriation bill is controversial, specifically for how it treats compensation, and that is why we need to look at what is the purpose of expropriation law per se. And that is something that's not really touched on by the commentariat. There's just an assumption that expropriation is this tool that government can use freely to take property as it wishes and under whatever circumstances it wants. That's not true. Expropriation is not an instrument that was conceived to punish people or to injure people. It is a tool that governments all around the world have under various names to bring about necessary social improvements. The owners of property that is being expropriated are innocent bystanders to a necessary government initiative. They are not the targets of any type of victimization policy. The idea of expropriation law is not to harm anyone, but to improve society. And that is why it must be quite difficult for government to engage in expropriation, because it causes such disruption to the lives and livelihoods of individuals who, by no fault of their own, now have to see their property taken from them. So the idea of expropriation law since the 1500s, when it was first conceived by Hugo Grotius, was to be a very a last resort instrument that government uses to bring about social improvement, not to punish anyone. And compensation really is a central part of this.
All right, so this idea of eminent domain, sometimes on rare occasions, the state needs to take control of property, but it recognizes that this is a last resort and that the owner of the property must be compensated fairly, but not even just fairly, but above and beyond for the inconvenience, for the potential trauma, the sentimental value of the property, for example. So there seems to be a disjuncture here with the EWC bill that is in violation of those principles.
No, absolutely. Compensation is probably the most important check and balance within the institution of expropriation that ensures that government cannot willy-nilly expropriate property for any good or bad reason. It must come at a cost to government. Because the cost that it already represents to the owners being expropriated is already grave. So the government must also bear a cost to ensure that it's not used in a liberal way. So compensation is the government's apology to owners to say, listen, we require your property for this good governmental reason. We're not doing it because we don't like you, because you've done anything wrong. We simply need your property, and we are sorry for that. Here is compensation. That is why market-based compensation is so important, because if you pay anything less than market compensation, you are in fact harming the owner in a way that is unnecessary and unacceptable. So the market value of that property must be returned to the owners so that they could use that money to acquire other property or to provide for themselves. But more than that, there is also the institution of solatium, in Afrikaans known as tranegeld or tier money, essentially to say, we are sorry, you received your market compensation, but because of the great inconvenience, not inconvenience, the great injustice, the necessary injustice nonetheless, but an injustice that the government is committing against you, here is an additional amount of money above market compensation. This is the importance that compensation represents. It's a way of government to apologize for something that it is doing that really harms innocent individuals. Look, the point about the punishment factor is important to bear in mind with the expropriation bill, because when you look at the discourse that has been pushed around this bill for the last 4 or 5 years, it is clear that the government has jettisoned this. They believe that this tool must be used as a tool of punishment outside of the law of criminal law and outside of the law of delict. Now, criminal law and the law of delict contain various institutional protections for individuals being charged with a crime or a delict to protect themselves. In criminal law, for instance, a guilty mind must be proven for an individual who has been accused of a crime. These are not present in expropriation law because the owners of property being expropriated have not done anything wrong. The government is not saying they've done anything wrong. So there is no point in having a requirement of a guilty mind or of recklessness, of negligence, for instance. So that government is now trying to use the expropriation bill to circumvent the due process requirements of criminal law and the law of delict, but still to punish owners is a great injustice that, in my view, and to be honest, this view isn't shared by many, because as I've said, the meta point that we're addressing here is not really up for discussion, but that the expropriation bill is in fact not an expropriation bill. What it represents is confiscation, or in a good South African word that's become very common over the last 2 decades, is dispossession. The expropriation bill is in fact a dispossession bill or a confiscation bill. It is government trying to make expropriation as easy as possible for itself and to make it as costly as possible for the owners. And that is why, which has been emphasized on this channel many times and will still be done many times going forward, that is why the expropriation bill, in its very bones, not only by its details, but in its very bones, is an illegitimate and very dangerous and very misnamed piece of legislation that South Africans would do very well to push back against.
Right, Martin. Well, obviously, throughout South Africa's history, there have been many instances in which people's property rights were violated, their property was confiscated by the state. How do we deal with some of these historical claims, whilst also balancing against the property rights of existing landholders and not undermining the whole property rights framework in South Africa?
No, that's very important. So it's precisely the fact that there were dispossessions in South Africa's history that land reform is necessary today. So it's precisely because the logic of property rights, or the sacredness of property rights, were violated back then, that we have to set that right. And we can't go about setting it right by not respecting private property rights. And that is why we have to look to the common law. And thankfully, our government did in 1995. The common law remedy of reivindicatio is simply the way of an owner saying, listen, someone else has my property and I am claiming it back. And the Restitution of Land Rights Act codified this principle, and it has allowed, I believe, about 1.8 million individuals up to about 2018, I'm not sure of the number today, to go to the land claims court and claim property that they have argued and that they have proven was taken by the colonial or apartheid governments from their ancestors, and that now they wish to receive that property or to be compensated financially if they do not want the property specifically back. And this process has been followed, and this process, from my understanding, has been remarkably successful with land claimants going to the land claims court and claiming their property back. And this must be respected. The principle of restitution of property is very central to the core of private property rights, and it's part of protecting property rights. But what the Expropriation Bill represents is an agenda of redistribution, just taking property randomly and shifting it around to achieve some racial formula, idealized formula of social engineering. That is not a part of the imperative of restitution. And again, it is not expropriation. It is simply punishment and government seeking to gain a lot of power for itself to engage in politicking and probably to dish out more patronage to friends. So yes, there is a land reform imperative here, but the so-called expropriation bill is not how you achieve that.
Martin van Staden, thank you very much. Let's hand over to you, our audience. Why do you think compensation is an important component of property rights? Leave your thoughts down in the comments section. Also, if you enjoyed this commentary, you might want to become a subscriber to the CRA's client services. We have a range of reports and briefings to assist you with navigating through uncertainty in South Africa. There's a link in the description below where you can find out more. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.